Welcome everyone to our Perseverance Landing virtual watch party. My name is Karen Rogers. I'm the director of the Astrobiology Center here at Rensselaer Polytech. And I'm joining you today from the CBIS Auditorium here on RPI's Troy campus. I'm joined today in person by a very few, very socially distanced colleagues in the Astrobiology Center. As well as some colleagues and alum from around the country that I'll introduce them in just a few minutes. But today, what we're here to do is experience together the excitement and terror and hopefully celebration of the entry, descent, and landing of the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover on the surface of the planet. So just to get us all in the mood, I think we're going to start with that video that NASA has put together of what they think should happen in the next hour and a half or so. So if we can get that video up, that would be great. So that entry, descent, and landing is scheduled to take place in just a little over an hour from now. Just watching that video gets me all excited and a little bit nervous. You'll be even more nervous when the time comes for real. I can tell you from experience, I did the same thing when Curiosity was landing. So between now and 4 o'clock, we're going to be talking a little bit about Mars and the mission itself. We have some special guests joining us. And sort of what it's like to build instruments, a little bit about Mars and its history, and how it is that we go about sending rovers to other planets. Before we get started, I want to cover just a few logistics. And while I'm covering those logistics, I'll go ahead and start sharing my slides. If you're joining us via WebEx, we're very excited for you to be able to put questions in the Q&A chat window, so please do that. If you are joining us via YouTube and you have a burning question, please go ahead and join via WebEx and we'll be able to get your questions there. If you don't get your question answered right away, don't worry about it. We'll be coming in and out of questions between our presentations and questions with the panelists throughout the course of the afternoon. So I promise we will get to you as soon as I can. So I'd like to start by introducing some of our panelists. So we have joining us from around the country today, Dr. Andrew Steele, Mars 2020 instrument team specialist from the Carnegie Institute. He's also an expert in Martian meteorites. We have joining us only sadly via video, recorded video is Mike Angel, also on the Mars 2020 SuperCam instrument team. He's going to be telling us a little bit about how he went about becoming becoming a part of the instrument team. He can't join us live though, because as soon as this thing lands, he actually has to start processing data. We also have an alum, Kobe Boykins, who is a mechanical engineer, works at JPL, and actually builds rovers for a living. So I'm really excited to hear from Kobe. And then last but not least, we have Mars geologist and professor at CU Boulder, Dr. Brian Henick. I'm also joined in the audience today by the RARE faculty. We have Jake Shelley, analytical chemist, isotope chemist Morgan Schaller, data scientist Peter Fox, and then there's me. I think astrobiologist by training. I also work a lot on prebiotic chemistry, the origins of life on Earth, and extreme microbiology. So you'll notice in that quick overview of the folks here in the RARE Center that I didn't mention anything about Mars. Largely what we do in the RARE Center is we're interested in trying to understand what this planet looked like, our own planet looked like very early in its history, and how those planetary conditions might have actually given rise to life. And so, believe it or not, that doesn't seem like something that would make us really interested in Mars, but what we really try and get after is how that thing that looks like a really weird Earth on the left might have given rise to life. I don't have a lot of opportunities to go back in time 4 billion years and visit that early Earth. But this mission to Mars is going to understand both the planetary and geochemical conditions that might have been habitable on Mars. It will also look for the organic compounds that might have arisen under those conditions. And so it gives us probably our best data point in terms of trying to figure out what kinds of planetary conditions might give rise to life. And so we're very much excited about this mission. If you want to learn more about our research or the Astrobiology Center here at RPI, please go to rare.rpi.edu. And one last thing, we are of course funded by NASA, and we are part of NASA's Prebiotic Chemistry and Early Earth Environments Consortium. And so there's plenty of information that you can find out about that as well. So with that, what I'd like to do is move to Mars as quickly as we can. So a little bit of information about Mars 2020. So Mars 2020 is the name of this mission. Perseverance is the name of the rover. Primarily, this rover has 2 jobs. It's going to look for signs of life, and it's going to collect rock samples and soil samples that will eventually, hopefully, come back to Earth. This spacecraft launched in July of 2020, and it is landing today in not too long from now. It's going to land at the Jezero crater, fingers crossed, and we'll learn a little bit more about the Jezero crater in just a minute. The mission duration is a year, which is more than a year. Of course it is. It's a Mars year, which is about 687 Earth days. One of the really cool parts of this is the helicopter that is on this to do a demonstration of how we might actually fly something on a planet without much of an atmosphere. And what we'll hear about a little later, which I think is really exciting, is the sampling and caching system that's on this rover that's going to allow us to bring back pieces of Mars to the Earth to study in our local laboratories. So before we get a quick overview of Mars and the entire mission, I just want to really quickly go over what it is that Perseverance and the Mars 2020 mission is meant to do. It is largely trying to understand the conditions in Jezero crater. This is a crater that likely used to be a lake, and so Mars had a really different condition early on in its history. It's going to try and understand some of that geology. This rover is also going to look for signs of life, particularly when it comes to the organic compounds that might be associated with the mineralogy that is present on the surface today. And then it's going to take some of those samples of the surface and cache them for later sample return, and we'll talk about that a little later. It is also going to do a technology test of whether or not we can actually generate oxygen on Mars through one of the instruments as preparation for humans going to the planet. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about Mars and talk a little bit about the mission. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Brian Henick, who is going to talk about the habitability of Mars through time. And so I have control of the slides, and Brian, you can just go ahead and tell me when you need me to switch the slides. And if the control room could bring Brian up, that would be great.
All right, well, thank you. Happy to be here, excited about the next couple hours. So yeah, let's talk about habitability, the ability to host life. Mars today, at least on the surface, it's not very encouraging in terms of habitability. Think of it as a cold, barren desert. It is dry, it is cold, there's hardly any atmosphere, so you can't retain much heat. So there's some stats there, but I mean, think about Antarctica. It's even colder than Texas today. So if you have a bucket of water and you throw it on Mars, it depending where you're at, what season it is, what your elevation is, it would do one of two things. It would either freeze immediately and then sublimate away, or it could potentially boil away, depending on the conditions, because you have such a thin atmosphere. So Mars today, at least on the surface, like I said, not that habitable, but in the past, we think it looked very, very different. So here's an artist's conception of what we think Mars looked like from, say, 3.8 billion years ago to 3.5 billion years ago. So we should have our blue Mars coming up. There. So yeah, we think Mars might have looked like this. There's pretty compelling evidence that it had an active water cycle, potentially even oceans on the surface. So next slide, please. So how do we know this? So I spent the last 25 years of my career studying the history of water on Mars, and we've learned a lot from all the previous missions, and we hope to learn a lot from this one as well. The answers are in the crust. It's written in the rocks, as we say in geologic terms. We see dried up river valleys all over the ancient surfaces of Mars. Those are the pictures on the top there, some of the mapping we did. Extensive river networks. We also find deltas, and deltas form, as you probably know, when a sediment-laden river, a muddy river, flows into a standing body of water. It loses its velocity and it drops all that sediment and makes a fan deposit at the front end. So this is the Ebers-Waldy Delta on Mars. This was not chosen as the landing site, but hopefully in the future. And there's a comparison to one on Earth. And these geologic signs and others really point to a prolonged, maybe hundreds of millions of years period when Mars looked very, very different than it does today, with water flowing across the surface and standing on it. Next slide, please. So this is sort of a time series cartoon sketch of what we think was going on Mars based on all the data that we have. So on the left there is the sort of the earliest times on Mars. And so more than 3.8 billion years ago, there was a lot of heat around. So we had a lot of volcanism, a lot of heat in the crust, and we probably had a lot of hydrothermal activity in the crust as well. We see signs left behind in the minerals. That middle picture there, that's when we think it was Mars's heyday, when we had the rivers, the oceans, the seas, the lakes, rain, snow, very, very closer to Earth than what Mars is today. And then on the right there is the last 3.5 billion years of history on Mars. It dried out. A lot of the water was lost through the atmosphere, off to space. Some of it is frozen in the ground and at the poles. So we really are focused on this time period in the middle there, the heyday. And just to point out, this time period is when Earth also had its first definitive signs of life. So this is exciting because this is when Jezero had a lake, and that's why we're going there. All right, next slide, please. So we have to use Earth and Earth's record of life to try to understand what we'd even look for on Mars, because we only have one data point for life, and that is all life on Earth. We know it came about quickly. That's exciting because Mars also had very similar conditions to Earth. So on the left there, that's the formation of the Earth 4.56 billion years ago, same time Mars formed and all the other planets. And then by 4 billion years, if you start sliding across that scale to the 4, we know that Earth had crust and Earth had oceans. And so we think Mars had very similar conditions. By the 3.8 billion years that Ishua first sedimentary evidence for earliest isotopic signs of life. So there are chemical signatures that life existed on Earth by 3.8 billion years ago, and probably even much earlier. We just don't have much of a rock record. And then as you continue on to the right, you'll see that, yeah, life changed, life evolved, but for over 3 billion years, life never got past single cells. It was always microscopic. So we think dinosaurs lived a long time ago, but really they're sort of a really recent event in Earth's geologic history and evolutionary history. So next slide, please. So given that life on Earth spent 3 billion years as microscopic and relegated to the oceans, what should we look for on Mars? And the picture on the left there, what you'd normally think of as fossils of fish or leaves or dinosaur bones, these really just came about in the last 15% of Earth's history. So we probably would not expect to find conch shells and dinosaur bones on Mars. What instead we're trying to key in on are signs of microbial ancient life. And yes, a single cell might break down pretty easily, but if you have a whole bunch of cells together, they can actually build structures that get preserved in the rock record. So that's the picture on the right there. These were layers of algae that had sediment in between them and build up these telltale signatures of life 3.6 billion years ago on Earth. So these are the types of things we'll be looking for on Mars.
Thanks, Brian, for that fantastic introduction to get us from a planet to fossils and what we're looking for. And I think that's a really good place to actually slide straight into a little bit about the mission. And so I'm going to ask Steely to jump in now, if the control room can bring up his audio. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got to this place and a little bit about the details of this mission. So Steely, if you're with us, you can go ahead and start right here with what I've already been through, which is the main science objectives of Mars 2020 and Perseverance.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. Yes, so the Perseverance rover mission is following on the success of several NASA rover missions over the years, but it's extending the science capabilities that we've had on Mars to more definitively try to find signs of life and transmit samples back to Earth for the first time. As in other missions, it has a geological context component to it, which will look at the geology of Mars, at Jezero crater, which is an ancient crater, as Brian just pointed out. The astrobiology goals of this mission are to obviously look for signs of life, as people have talked about, but also to look for signs of non-life, and I'll go into a little bit of that later. And one way that you could do life detection, these rovers are fantastically capable instruments. They're amazingly complex spacecraft. But bringing samples back to Earth allows us to access even greater instrumentation and with higher resolution to make more definitive measurements if the signs of life aren't that obvious. And finally, it's also to prepare for a human exploration of Mars. And there's an instrument on the payload MOXIE that is going to start producing oxygen from CO2 so that we can look at developing breathable atmosphere on Mars for future astronauts. Next slide, please, Karen. So in the return sample science objectives, these are to really start to definitively look at signs of life and also geochronology, how old certain rocks are. Currently, we use a lunar model for this on cratering rates. So to ground truth the cratering rates on another planet would be really spectacular. Looking at the carbon cycle, If there is no life, why isn't there life? And that has huge implications, as Karen mentioned earlier, as to how life started on this planet. So not having the sign of life is just as scientifically relevant in some ways as having signs of life. Looking at the late chemistry and Mars climate at that time at Jezero will allow us to have a better understanding of how the habitability of Mars developed over time. And that obviously will allow us to kind of focus on areas that may have signs of life, as was pointed out earlier. Earth and Mars are really, really similar early in development. Next slide, please. So it's a 3-mission campaign at the moment with international partners, ESA and other space agencies. We're currently at Mars 2020, as you know, but the next 2 missions will be an orbiter and a Mars ascent vehicle lander. So Mars 2020 will core and cache samples and leave them behind for a fetch rover, which will then take them to the Mars ascent vehicle. That'll blast off into Mars orbit and rendezvous with the capture system that will bring it back to Earth. Really difficult to put a Mars ascent vehicle on Mars to get back to Earth. So you need that third step to rendezvous and capture and bring it back. Next slide, please. So this is a notional sampling campaign for Perseverance, where it goes and drills and cores samples, holds them in these core tubes, and then it will place them for pickup by the next rover, the next fetch rover. You'll hear people talk about terrain following radar navigation in the landing today. That's extremely important because it lowers your error ellipse and allows us to land more precisely, in which case it will enable us to pick up these samples. Next slide, please. And this goes back over that architecture, but with one really important addition, that's Mars return sample handling. So when the samples come back from Mars, investigators will get the chance to really use the best instrumentation on this planet to really unpick what's happening with those samples. As I've said before, the instrument package on this mission is just absolutely spectacular, but there are trade-offs between the instruments that you can send to another planet and the instruments we have in our laboratory. Next slide, please. I work on Mars meteorites, for instance, which some people would say was a natural sample return. Craters on Mars released material into the solar system, some of which has fallen on Earth. We have about 200 of them at the moment, but they're all of a very specific kind. They're all igneous. We need to get a sedimentary record, which is where Perseverance is going today. Next slide, please. And a lot of this started in 1996 with the announcement of a possible life in a Martian meteorite, ALH 84001 by Dave McKay, in these small carbonate globules in there, which carbonate is one of the lithologies that hopefully we'll find at Jezero. Next slide, please. And that really kick-started a lot of astrobiology initiatives and a lot of missions to Mars. This particular meteorite you see here, held by my friend Caroline Smith, is a meteorite called Tacint that was seen to fall in Morocco about 10 years ago. And I've been working a lot on this meteorite because it's relatively uncontaminated. Next slide, please. And why bring samples back? This is the best way I could think of showing you that. This is one of the instruments that I've been using on my Mars meteorite work. It's a Beamline diamond, IO8 Beamline. That entire room is bigger than the Perseverance rover, and it gets me able to see things at resolutions that we can't do on Mars. The top right image you see here is a single bacterial membrane, and the small bar you see at the bottom is 50 nanometers, which means 20 of those in a bacteria, 200 bacteria end to end is about the width of a human hair. So if you look at the bottom image, from my work, we have found abiotic, non-life organic chemistry in Martian meteorites, and in my work with Sam on Mars Science Lab, we found the similar material on Mars. And this gives you an idea of how much resolution you need to be able to unpick these signs of life if they're not obvious or obvious kind of macrofabric as Brian showed earlier. Next slide, please. And the other thing about sample return, it's the gift that keeps on giving. On the left, we have Apollo samples, and this is from the new batch of Apollo samples that was just opened last year. So scientists are still analyzing these rocks, and as instruments have got better over time, we can keep reanalyzing. On the right, that's my daughter, Annalise, sat over here at the moment, sitting at a Raman microscope. It's similar to Raman microscopy. There are two on the current rover, but that instrument has a lot better resolution. It's a lab-based instrument. It's a lot more precise, and also I can basically make the samples easier for me to work on that instrument. And it's people like Annalise and the younger people out there, if we bring samples back in 2031, who are going to be working on them. So who knows what that Raman will be capable of by then. Next slide, please. And that's me for now.
Great. Thanks very much, Celia. I very much appreciate that. I always get so excited about sample return, and then I remember that we have a bunch of Martian samples, and a lot of them actually hang out in your lab. So it's very, very cool that you could share some of that information with us. I know that some of you have been typing some questions in the Q&A. I think we're going to hold off on those just one for like 5 more minutes, because I'm really excited about our next guest. Kobe Boykins is an alum from RPI in the mechanical engineering department. He works at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he builds rovers for a living, which, I thought what I did was cool, but seriously, he's got me hands down on that. So what I'd like to do is just ask Kobe to join us and tell us a little bit about how you go from, being an undergraduate student here in Troy, New York, and then moving to JPL and building rovers that you send to other planets. So if we can get Kobe's video up, that would be fantastic. Kobe, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't know if you wanted me to do the live one or if you wanted to, so everybody knows we did a recording one because I didn't know if I was going to be able to be here. But I will talk live because I am here.
Let's go live. Let's go live.
So, yeah. So I started off, like a lot of students do at RPI. I actually grew up in Nebraska, and so I got the Rensselaer Medal in high school, and that was sort of a start to me going, what is this place, RPI? And I looked into the school, and they had a Division I hockey program, and I walked onto the hockey team. So not only was I in the engineering world, I actually played ice hockey there at RPI. And when I was there, one of the things I always wanted to do, and we really talked about a lot, was the cooperative education program. And so I had put my resume in and sort of said, hey, I would like to work at NASA. And I know at the time we had a pretty good relationship with JPL. I had done some of the, when we had on lab or on school site interfaces, that JPL would show up and I went and talked to them. And then in I think it was my sophomore year, in 2000, geez, I can't remember. My end of my sophomore year, middle of sophomore year, junior year, somewhere. Gosh, it's all blur today. I got a phone call from a guy named Don Bickler at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Don Bickler is the father of the mobility system that you see on all of our rovers. So started off in Sojourner and has been used throughout all of the rovers that we have. And he asked me some questions, asked me some technical questions. We did a technical interview while we were on the phone, and I thought, oh my goodness, this guy's going to figure out I'm a total phony and I don't know anything. And then the next day I get this phone call that says, hey, why don't you come out to JPL and work with us? And so I packed up my stuff. I drove from RPI in Troy and ended up in Southern California here in Pasadena, and started to work on the first rover that we sent to the surface of Mars, which was called Sojourner. And my job as a student was to actually, we did 2 different things. One was I made all the cleats. So the wheels have these cleats on them, and it was sort of cheap labor. That was one of my jobs. The other job, which was actually quite a bit more fun, was we didn't actually understand exactly how this multi-body system was going to work. So in that video, you saw a parachute and the main body of the vehicle. And for Sojourner, and then on to Spirit and Opportunity, we actually had an airbag system that was held by a string, and not a descent stage that you saw here, a sky crane maneuver, for what we're doing for Curiosity, and then now for Perseverance, which you're going to see today. Anyway, we built that a mock-up of that, and then we flew it off of a helicopter in Ohio to actually get sort of feedback on those dynamics. Either way, you know, I came back, I graduated, you know, with, I should tell a quick story. One of my funniest class was I came back and I had one of my, you know, core mechanisms courses, and you know, I had learned how to do mechanism analysis now being at JPL, and so when I did it the way we would normally do it, it wasn't correct, right? I wasn't worried about the third decimal place getting the answer right. I was just worried about getting close enough and saying, okay, with the factor of safety 2, we're good, and that really made my teacher mad, professor. So, but you know, I think it was such a great experience that I learned a lot of the what is the practical engineering, what we're learning in hands-on engineering at RPI, and then how to actually apply that to what we do at JPL. And then one of the things that I really love about the laboratory as it's set up is it feels very much like campus, and not very different from RPI, other than it's on a different hill in a lot warmer climate, and I don't ever have to worry about walking through the snow. I do have to worry about earthquakes. But you know, we're always learning, and it's a challenge, and that I know that on our crest it says knowledge and thoroughness, but it's so interesting to me is that one of the things that we always look for is people to be very knowledgeable and be very, very thorough. We use the engineering acumen and diligence when you're doing a job like this, and so as you can see the background and some of the questions that are coming through. The engineering that goes into one of these vehicles, and we've talked a lot about the science today so far, but the engineering to just make this vehicle be able to land successfully, get to the surface and land in Jezero crater where we want it to go, how we operate it in this remote environment, the software that's on board to communicate to it, and have it do, I'm going to say, some smarts, like almost an ant. Those types of things are amazingly developed and then tested. And when I say tested, I mean tested to the point where, gosh, you would be surprised how many hours we spend trying to break one of these rovers and trying to figure out where the extent of the rover is. I guess I should move to this side so you can see the rover in the background. But I mean, we love these rovers become sort of like our children, and we want to nourish them. But the trip for me from RPI was awesome, and I'm so amazed that, you know, 26 years later that I still get to work on these vehicles. I've been blessed to be part of all of the rover missions that have been to the surface. I say this jokingly, but I was promoted to my level of incompetence. I was a section manager, which meant I had about 140 people on my team. And the team that I got to run built, you know, the instruments and the helicopter for this particular vehicle. So for perseverance, there's a lot of ties that go back. And at one point in time, the whole, I'll say in the mechanical world, in what we call the Engineering and Science Directorate at JPL, the director of the Engineering Science Directorate, the director or the manager of the Mechanical Systems Engineering, and then myself were all people who graduated from RPI. And so RPI has huge ties to this rover and every other rover, plus a huge pipeline into JPL that has been amazing for years. And I don't know what else you want me to say other than, you know, this is going to be such a cool day. I'm very excited. It's just an amazing thing to get a chance to be part of one of these rovers, listen to some of the science that's going to come back and some of the things that we're going to do with it. And then as we look toward the future with what you just heard in terms of a sample return, you can imagine how crazy that engineering feat will be, not only just because of what we are trying to do getting to the surface, but then trying to get something from the surface back to Earth. It's just all these engineering challenges, and you can imagine the technology that has to be developed to make those happen are still in front of us. And it's what excites me about doing this kind of work.
Kobe, thank you so much. I'm so excited. You know, we live on this campus and we think, why not change the world? And then we have people like you and you're like, well, I'm going to change the world and then go to another one. It really doesn't get much better than that. That is super cool. As an aside, you know, I work on vehicles that go to the bottom of the ocean, and I thought those engineers were cool, but you just sort of blow my mind. That's just so fantastic. So thank you for that. I don't know if there are any questions for Kobe real quick while we have him. I know he has to take off for the rest of the landing. I think we do. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, we do. We do have one question from Rhett that says, tell us about some of the difficulties of designing a helicopter for Mars and being so excited about this new toy.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, you know, interesting to see there's a blog post that's on the RPI site, and Bob Ballaram, who was the chief engineer of the helicopters, another RPI grad. So I'll just keep pointing out these RPI people that are working on these things. But you know, the helicopter was crazy. You know, I can tell you all the stories and in and outs, but I'll talk about just, you know, thinking about flying something in a we'll say average 7-tour CO2, we can get down to a little bit less than that. And so you're talking 1/100th of our atmosphere, and then being able to control it. And the reality is that you can make really big propellers, blades, and we teamed up with AV to do that. And they were an unbelievable industrial partner to work with us. But, you know, just making something light enough, something that can sort of charge itself. I mean, like, you know, if you've read up on the helicopter in Ingenuity, you'll find that, you know, it's not supposed to last for forever, right? It's not going to, you know, it doesn't really have a science goal, i.e. it has to do this. I mean, what we're really trying to do, just like we did with Sojourner way back when, is prove out the technology for future exploration. And if you've been watching what's going on within NASA, there's another mission that's going to go to Titan called Dragonfly, which is a quadcopter. And you know, that's been selected. Zibby Tuttle is the PI, and that's done out of the Applied Physics Laboratory. So, I mean, you're seeing this sort of new technology and way of exploration becoming sort of the next thing, right? Can we do a mobility system that flies, covers a lot more land, sees the Earth or the Mars or Titan from a different perspective, and then can work in conjunction, at least for Ingenuity, can work in conjunction with Perseverance, give us some information, maybe tell us what's over that ledge, and is it more important to go there versus going somewhere else? Now, we still have assets over the surface of Mars with Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, so we get very, very good imagery of the surface. But all of these things can actually help us as we go forward. So for me, it's really exciting because it's the next chapter in terms of exploration, right? This is our 5th rover on the surface. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's old hat because it's not. What you're going to see today is one of the craziest things that will happen. But in terms of growth and moving forward with how we do exploration of other planetary bodies, this might be the next step.
Thanks, Kobe. That's awesome. I can't imagine. Let's go fly a helicopter on Mars, and you're sitting in your lab like, oh yeah, okay, I'll go design a helicopter for Mars, no problem. So I know Kobe has some other duties today, but hopefully he can stay online for a few minutes, and maybe if there are questions, you can throw them in the Q&A. That would be great. And I just want to say that RPI is so proud to have you as an alum. Really, thank you for joining us today. It's a big deal for us to have you here. So speaking of helicopters on Mars, one of the things, right, that sort of brings to mind is in a helicopter, you get to explore a whole lot more of the surface than you would just by roving around, right? That's why we take planes instead of cars to get across the country. Same thing with helicopters on Mars. So let's go take a look at the surface and where we're actually going on Mars. And so I'm going to have Brian Heenick join us again and tell us a little bit about our landing site.
All right. Yes, let's now, after the broad brush of what Mars looked like, let's zoom in on the landing site, Jezero crater. So this was one of a number of finalists that got winnowed down, and finally ended up with consensus that Jezero was the place to go. So there's globes of Mars there. The colors are elevation. So red is high, blue is low. And so the sort of the regional setting, you can see that arrow for Jezero. To the southwest, there's a very large volcano, the Syrtis Major volcano, that was active about the same time Jezero probably hosted a lake. It's imprinted on top of this really big impact basin called Isidis. And then off to the northeast, you're out in the plains there, the low parts of Mars, where if there ever was an ocean, that's probably where it would have been at. So let's go to the next one. Now we'll zoom in just on the crater, about 30 miles across. You can probably pick out the crater rim there, and this circular deposit. So this was an asteroid or comet that smashed into Mars, just like hundreds of thousands of others did back in the day, and it made a big basin. And in this basin, though, unlike a lot of the craters, there's strong evidence there was a lake in the past. And we know this because of in the upper left there, you see this inlet valley. So this is one of those extensive river systems that flowed toward the crater. It breached the rim, and then you can probably see a fan even where that inlet valley comes in. So this is one of those deltas. We'll show it in more detail in a bit. That white circle, this is the landing ellipse. So this is where the engineers at JPL, like Kobe, tell us, we're going to land within that circle. We don't know exactly where, but we're 99% sure we're going to be in that circle. So that's where the rover is going to land, sort of right at the edge of this delta. And the other thing, the outlet channel noted up there, that tells us that this crater was entirely full. So you had a river flow in, fill it with water, and then it breached the low part of the rim on the other side, and then you had a river flowing out of it. So let's go to the next slide. This is what we think it looked like maybe 3.6 billion years ago. So this is with the Mars topography, and you can see the river channel coming in on the right side, filling the lake, and then a river channel flowing out. So this was a long-lived hydrologic environment here. So we had water there for a long time. And just the dimensions of this, I mean, this is a huge lake, 30 miles across and 600 feet deep in places. So that's deeper than almost any lake on modern Earth. All right, next, please. So this is what we're excited about, and we want to go and study the delta. So there's a couple of deltas there, landing by the big one. And why do we care? Back to sort of the fossils and trying to look for signs of past life. Deltas are extremely good at concentrating any life that was washed in that river that came from upstream, and then quickly burying it and preserving it. So on Earth, deltas are just loaded with organic materials that were washed in. We're hoping the same is true for Mars, that anything up in that watershed quickly got put into that delta and buried. You want to bury it so that it'll preserve it for down the road. The oxidizing environment at the surface of Mars is very harsh. But when you have rapid burial, you're much more likely to preserve fossils or biosignatures. Next, please. So this is a delta in Alaska, and now we're going to go to the Jezero one. So this is that inlet valley, the river that was flowing into the crater and the lake. And again, as that river dropped all of its sediments and hopefully biosignatures, they got quickly buried and built into that fan deposit that is sitting there. And just want to note that the colors here, this is from orbiters around Mars. We can tell there's very diverse geology. We get a lot of different mineral signatures within this delta and around it. We see carbonates, like Steely talked about, and clay minerals. So the minerals are also consistent with a long-lived body of water here. Next, please. So like I said, we don't know exactly where it's going to land, somewhere in that white circle. So that'll sort of lead to what science gets done in what order. So if we land out at the red bullseye, we'd probably want to go explore those delta remnants and then march our way toward the actual delta. If we land closer to it and are fortunate to be, say, in the green bullseye, then we're already close to the delta. We'd want to study those lower bottom deposits. We'd want to study the lake bed deposits. It seems like we should be able to climb up onto that delta, given the topography that we have, study the surface of the delta, then get to the margin of the lake. So shorelines would be another key target. And then eventually up to the crater rim there. So this might be my most exciting spot to go, because when the crater formed, there was a lot of heat involved. And if there was water around, we probably had hydrothermal activity up in that crater rim. So life on Earth very well could have come about in hydrothermal environments. Many people believe that. And we might be able to access hydrothermal environments from early Mars if we make it all the way up to the crater rim. I think I'm done. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I just want to clarify, right, when we're looking at those colors are just coordinated with minerals. Those aren't actually the colors on Mars.
Yes, that is correct. We have colorized it based on the minerals.
Excellent. So as we're sort of going on this tour of the crater, this potential tour that Brian just brought us through, it's important to know exactly what we have as an instrument package on Perseverance and sort of to look at all of those sites. And so I'm going to bring Steely back in really quick, and I'm going to ask Steely to go through some of the instruments that we have. And Steely, I'm going to ask you to pick maybe your 3 or 4 favorite ones. We have a hard stop in about 6 minutes, and so you have 6 minutes to tell us about any of your favorite instruments, and you get to pick from these.
All right. Well, you know, most of them are my favorites, to be honest. One thing you don't see on this diagram are the navigation and hazard cameras that the rover will use to navigate itself. It drives itself. It's an amazing technology. Takes a couple of stereo images, superimposes them, makes it into a 3D terrain map, and then chooses the best way to go. On this, for me, I'm on the Sherlock instrument, the ultraviolet spectrometer, that basically will shine a laser light in the UV at the samples, and from there it will make a spectrum of what it interacts with, which usually means a series of squiggly lines that are shifted from the laser line, and the pattern of those lines will tell us what that material is. Actually, Karen, could you go to the next slide, please? On top, so we can see, we have stereo vision like our own eyes, so we can look around and understand the terrain around us, and make measurements from the instrument with a spectroscope to look at different colors. Next slide, please. Also on here is a Raman laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, which will basically, one of these will fire the laser. You see the shot of the laser coming out, and that will be able to tell us the mineralogy. Next slide, please. This is Pixel, which is, it kind of shines an X-ray source, and it glows, and how it glows, like almost like the color it glows, is indicative of certain minerals. Next slide, please. Here's Sherlock, the instrument that I'm associated with, and really looking forward to start getting data down and working with this. And hopefully with this, we have a really fantastic sensitivity to organic molecules, and that's what we'll be looking for. Next slide, please. And this is Watson. So of course, Sherlock means a Watson. This is the microscopic imager that will take close pictures of things. Next slide, please. And this is the kind of data product we hope to get from these instruments. This is a stromatolite, as Brian described earlier. If we have these macro fabrics, we'll be able to put the instruments in, and a lot these Pixel and Sherlock are both at the end of the arm, so the arm will move and contact, and then we'll be able to take analysis of that area and hopefully get something like this. You can see in the bottom, it's showing you the concentrations of iron versus titanium, and silicon and calcium. And the top image, Sherlock, is showing chert, which is a silicate, organics, and a carbonate. So that's the kind of data product we'll be getting back and hopefully crunching. Next slide, please. This is a great instrument. This is from Norway, Spinetics instrument, which is a ground-penetrating radar, so we can look for signs of subsurface ice and water. Next, please. You know, everyone needs to know the weather, right? And MEDA, a Spanish instrument, will look at, you know, visible light, UV light, temperature, wind speed, humidity. Unfortunately, on MSL, one of the little antenna needed to look at wind speed directions was damaged during landing, and this MEDA will have the same kind of instrument, so we can start to make those comparisons of what modern day weather is like and what that means for habitability. Next slide, please. And ultimately, we need to one day send astronauts to Mars, and this is the beginning of that, which is fantastic, really exciting experiment going up to make oxygen from CO2, because you don't just need oxygen to breathe, you can also use it as a rocket fuel to get home. Next slide, please. And that's what it looks like when it's all stacked together. It's like in the ultimate Kinder egg, if you wish, all pushed in and shaped in a way that fits within that back shell. And that's basically the descent stage that you're looking at there. And that'll be what we're looking at. I think two-stage separation will be in around about 14 minutes. So that's what we're looking at. We'll begin the journey through the Martian atmosphere. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. There's your quick look and a whiz through the instruments there.
Thank you so much. I can't believe you did all of the instruments in like 6 minutes flat. That's ridiculous. I can tell everyone out there in the audience that it took way more than 6 minutes flat to develop all those instruments. So you really did a beautiful job summarizing that. So what I want to do right now, I know there are some questions out there waiting. I promise I'm trying to get to those questions from the whole audience. But before we do that, I'm also trying to squeeze in the last piece of our program before we have to cut to NASA TV and experience our 10 minutes or 20 minutes of terror. So what I'd like to do now is play a video that is an interview with another instrument specialist. This is Mike Engel, interviewed by our own Jake Shelley. Mike worked on the SuperCam. And so we're going to go ahead and play that. And then we'll come back to you with some questions, and then we'll cut into NASA TV to actually experience the entry, descent, and landing. So here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jake Shelley. I'm an assistant professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology. And I'm also the associate director of the Rensselaer Astrobiology Research and Education Center. Today, I'm being joined by Professor Mike Engel, who's a Carolina trustee professor and the Fred M. Weissman Palmetto Chair in Chemical Ecology at the University of South Carolina. And Mike's group has been heavily involved in the Mars 2020 mission, both in the research and development side, building chemical instrumentation for the SuperCam package that's on board the Perseverance rover, as well as figuring out unique targets and things to be able to analyze. Welcome, Mike. It's great to be able to talk to you today.
Thanks, Jake. Good to see you again.
Yeah, definitely. I just had a couple quick questions I want to run through to get your thoughts on. So first of all, just a general introduction. What has been your role in the Mars 2020 mission so far, both in planning, development, as well as after launch, and then hopefully after this successful landing?
Yeah, that's a really good question because my role has been evolving. One of the really cool things about working with NASA is they encourage everybody on the science team, actually everybody on the team, period, to get involved in as many aspects of the project as possible. They say, everybody chip in. We want to hear from everybody. That's been really nice. I started out as a technical expert. As you know, my expertise is remote laser analysis. So I started out as a technical expert, but I've been involved, other than that, technical expert means that basically I help analyze data, right? So when we land, we'll be generating lots of spectroscopic data, and one of my roles is to help analyze it. Now, early on as a technical expert, I was also involved in the proposal that was written and submitted from Los Alamos that got funded to build the SuperCam instrument. And I was involved a little bit in the design, really refining the design of the SuperCam instrument. But my role has also been, I've been expanding my role because I've been volunteering to learn to take on some of the geology aspects of the project. So I've been involved in mapping Jezero crater, the landing area of Jezero crater, geological mapping, which is used to determine what routes we'll take, once the rover does land on Mars. And I've also training right now for 2 roles. One is for downloading data called the SPDL, or Scientific Payload Downlink Leader. And I'm also training to be a scientific payload uplink leader, PUL. And the downlink data leader is really cool because you get the first look at the data as it comes in every day.
Wow.
Before it's distributed. And the PUL is also really cool because PUL, you basically work with the rover through these apps. You can actually see the Martian in real time. You can see well, not exactly real time. There's a time delay, but you can see where the rover's sitting, and you can help target and pick targets that will be measured by the various instruments.
That's really neat. That's really, really cool.
It's really fun and very, very stressful.
Oh, I can imagine.
Because a lot of this stuff is outside of my area. I don't know anything about geology, but I'm trying to.
I'm in a similar boat here in the Rare Center, learning about geology with a chemistry background. So it's a lot of fun. I agree.
So you understand. Yeah.
Out of all the things that you and your research group have been involved with, both in terms of instrumentation and data with respect to this project, what has made you kind of the most proud or most excited?
Well, as you know, my expertise goes way back in the area of remote laser analysis. And one of the key parts of the SuperCam instrument, SuperCam is actually composed of about 5 different instruments. And two of those are remote laser analysis. And I was lucky enough to be involved with that really early on, even before I got into academics. And I wrote a paper in 1992 basically describing the type of instrument that is in use on Curiosity right now, a remote Lib spectrometer. And it's also going to be used on the Perseverance, a remote Lib spectrometer and a remote Raman spectrometer. And so, I was involved in that early on. Never dreamed of it being used on another planet, but it turns out it's a really good tool for that. So I'm really proud of that work has led to this being used on this, call it a historic mission.
Yeah, that's got to be fantastic. Just having this idea for so long and watching it progress over time and now seeing this pinnacle. That's just awesome. Really neat. Really, really neat.
Yeah, it's really cool. Not that I had anything to do with it. I just had the first one. I wasn't the first, but I was among the first. But it just, it's just one of those things. It just turns out that something you developed, you never dreamed they could have the applications that ends up happening. Of course, that always happens, right? For any of the instruments that I or anybody develops, you really never know where it's going to end up.
Yeah.
But in this case, it on Mars.
That's cool. Neat. So from your perspective, with all of the unique chemical instrumentation that exists on Perseverance, what is really the most exciting aspect of the mission or of the rover itself to you as an analytical chemist?
There's no question. There's really 3 parts to the mission. And to me, the most important part of this is looking for life, the search for life. This is the first spacecraft that we've sent to another planet where every instrument, for most of the instruments, are designed specifically to look for traces of life. Of course, that's the biggest question there is, right? Is there life elsewhere? This mission is designed for that very purpose. And, depends on who you talk to. I think, there's a really good chance that we'll find that. Now, what we're looking for, of course, is we're not looking to find a fish swimming in a stream, nothing like that. We're looking for traces of life that might have existed billions of years ago. And the instruments we have on this rover, the really sophisticated instruments, are designed to look for these trace amounts of things that might have been left, minerals and things like that, traces from things that might have lived billions of years ago on Mars. That's as exciting as it gets to me.
I agree. I completely agree. That's fantastic. Now, we have sent a number of analytical instruments to Mars over the past several decades, and by far this is the most advanced rover for sure. But we always kind of have to compromise, right, and leave things out when we send unique tools to other places. Right. So what analytical tools would you like to see sent to Mars, or combination of tools that hasn't been so far, maybe a future mission?
That's a really good question. 2 answers to that. If I could pick any instrument to send to Mars or to send to any other planet, Europa, Enceladus, anywhere to look for life, I think I would pick an instrument that could measure Raman optical activity. Now, I'm not the first to come up with that idea. There are people working on that right now, trying to design an instrument that can do that. Carl Bush at the University of Delaware comes to mind. He's working on this as we speak. And the idea here is that, so what's unique about living organisms? One of the things that's unique about them is that the proteins and things and sugars and things tend to be chiral. That is, they have a left-handed or right-handedness, and they rotate light. And you can actually, if you shine a laser on these types of molecules, and you look at the Raman scattering that comes back, you can pick up that left and right-handedness in the Raman spectrum. But it takes a really sensitive Raman spectrometer to do it. It's not trivial. But it would be almost the ultimate tool if we could design one that could fly. And people are working on it. I'm not, but other people are working on that. So I think that would be one of the ultimate tools.
I agree. Wow, that would be fantastic. I mean, measuring chirality is a really difficult task here, even here on Earth, and we usually need pretty complicated systems that are often difficult to send outside of our own planet. So, wow, that would be just amazing.
But if you could do it, and if you can't bring samples back, it would be one of the ultimate tools to use, in place there in situ.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's the one that comes to mind. Obviously, I'm biased because I think of laser analysis. I'm sure there are other tools that would be just as good, but that's what comes to mind to me.
Right. So I can just feel the excitement. I'm even excited for you and the rest of the Mars 2020 team and all of this. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in your shoes, just being involved with something just so incredible. If you were somehow able to interact with your younger self when you were a kid, and your younger self could see your level of involvement in this mission, what do you think younger you would say?
That's a really good question. Total disbelief, just complete disbelief. You have to understand where I'm coming from, Jake. I don't come from an academic family. I grew up on a farm. I mean, two of my grandparents couldn't read or write. And so, I used to be, as a little tiny kid, I had a $20 telescope from Sears. And I would go out into the yard. I was like 10 years old at the oldest. And I would draw maps of the moon, looking through my little telescope, maps of the moon, right? And I would compare them to the encyclopedias and all that kind of stuff. Wow. And also, I'm at that age, the Apollo program was in full swing, the moon program. So I was watching that on TV, of course, getting really excited about that. And I never would have dreamed in a million years that you could put those two things together and make a career out of it. I didn't even know science was a job back then. You could get paid to do science. And the idea of putting those two things together, which is kind of what I've done, if you think about the kind of stuff I do, I really kind of combine those two things with chemistry. And the idea that it led to being involved in this, historic mission like this would just be beyond. I would never have imagined such a thing. Never.
Wow. I can't even imagine. This is really great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. I really appreciate the time. Again, best of luck to you and the rest of the Mars 2020 team. We're all hoping for a successful landing and really looking forward to seeing some of the amazing data that come out of this this entire mission.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jake Shelley. I'm an assistant.
So we are going to cut straight to NASA TV now because we are just about to hit the first crew stage separation. We'll talk over it if anything cool happens, but we're going to go straight to NASA video and audio.
Thanks for guiding us through landing today, Swati.
Hi, Raquel. I'm happy to be here today.
It's really the culmination of all that work. So this vehicle is getting ready to push that crew stage away. Once it gets pushed away, the entry system with the rover inside, but the rover is still in charge. It's going to get ready to take the vehicle, turn it to the right orientation, and aim it to Mars and prepare for entering the atmosphere. This won't be long. Be prepared for this event.
Taking about a minute and a half from crew stage separation. About 11 minutes, 20 seconds from entry interface.
Okay, so it's about 10 minutes from crew stage separation till entering the top of the atmosphere. From then on and out, things happen fast.
MFST tones. Telemetry will have stopped.
Telecom is confirming that the spacecraft has switched to broadcasting tones. These tones are received directly from Perseverance, but have very limited information content. We won't receive real-time information until about 9-10 minutes from now, once the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter starts relaying information from Perseverance. We are under a minute from crew stage separation, about 10.5 minutes from entry interface.
It's getting exciting. I have to admit, I am quite anxious, but very hopeful that this machine is going to do.
Great. I just want to cut in while we listen to NASA TV and let everybody know online that we see a bunch of really cool questions coming in. We promise we'll get back to them as soon as this thing lands. We're too excited to step away and take questions right now. We just want to watch and listen to NASA, but we promise we will get back to you and we will get to those questions. The panel's sticking around. So let's go back to NASA TV and then we'll come back to you all.
We have indication that cruise stage separation has been confirmed by the spacecraft.
We're off on a good start.
In about 1 minute, Perseverance's landing software will wake up and begin the final preparations for entry. The first action it will do is to fire warm-up pulses with the entry thrusters. These pulses ensure that the spacecraft gets the thrust that it wants during entry interface. We're about 9 minutes from entry interface.
Okay, so now the vehicle's on its own. It's turning itself in the direction of facing the heat shield toward Mars, and will eventually hitting the top of the atmosphere. We're not far away. This is going to go very quickly from here on out.
That's confirmation that we got shadowed by the cruise stage as it passed through our beam to the Earth.
Telecom indicated actually that we could see a signal that the cruise stage went between the Perseverance entry capsule and Earth. So we saw a little blip, the data stream indicating cruise stage separation. We have confirmation that the vehicle has started warming up those entry thrusters. Warm-up pulses have begun. At this point, the spacecraft is trying to stop its spin from the cruise 2 revolutions per minute down to 0, and then will turn to its desired orientation from entry. It will separate the 2 balance masses that has kept it balanced during all of cruise. This will allow the entry capsule to have lift when it enters the atmosphere. We have confirmation that the spacecraft has turned to the desired entry attitude. We're about 7.5 minutes from entry interface.
Okay, the vehicle is pointed in the right direction. Thrusters are warmed up and doing their job. And now we've spun down from the 2 revolutions per minute that the vehicle had the whole way to Mars. It's a spin stabilized spacecraft. And then from here on out, it's going to just be a bullet, and it's going to control its orientation and attitude via rockets on the back of that back shell.
Points carrier lock. Sorry, the DTE from Radio Science from Green Bank reports carrier lock. You see the carrier in the downlink. Flight level 1.
We are continuing to wait for entry interface. We're about 6 minutes and 45 seconds from entry interface. We have confirmation from Greenback that they are receiving direct to Earth telemetry via that path. The spacecraft Perseverance is currently transmitting heartbeat tones. These tones indicate that Perseverance is operating normally and has nothing significant to report. This is as expected. We're currently just over 6 minutes from entry interface.
Okay, and now we wait.
So I just want to remind everybody what's going on here. The spacecraft is going to enter the atmosphere. At some point, a parachute is going to deploy to start to slow that spacecraft down. We will knock off the heat shield. Once it gets close enough, the sky crane will lower down the rover to the surface, and then it will fire its pyros so it goes and crashes very far away from the rover, and then we will actually hopefully hear back from the rover. So we'll bring NASA TV back up, but if you didn't remember the video from an hour and a half ago, I just wanted to remind everybody how this goes, and we will go back in. We're expecting atmospheric entry here in 5 minutes, and then it is really absolute terror and nail biting until we get to the end, so hold on to your seats.
Plasma blackout, or when we enter the peak heating phase. Aside from these outages caused by the plasma blackout, antenna switching, or high dynamic events, spacecraft events, we should have telemetry until about 90 seconds after landing. A plasma blackout is when the signal from Perseverance isn't strong enough to make it through the superheated, super fast air flowing around the spacecraft all the way down to Earth. Once the temperature drops below that peak heating, we do reacquire the signal from Perseverance. We are currently about 4.5 minutes from entry interface. Perseverance continues to report heartbeat tones, indicating everything is nominal.
Okay, what we're looking for now is Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter should be in view soon of our vehicle and be able to listen to ones and zeros coming from a separate radio that's really designed to talk between spacecraft.
Camera reports the electro radio is powered on. Ready to receive signals from the lander.
Okay, MRO is ready and able and waiting for to hear from our rover.
Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has reported that it's ready to receive the signal from Perseverance. It should be in a few minutes here. We're just
Flight level 1
from entry interface.
We don't need these ones and zeros, as Swati said, but to land safely, but we really need it for our own health and well-being today to keep our nerves under control. But
around this time, a second spacecraft, Maven, should begin picking up telemetry from Perseverance and will continue to record that telemetry until several minutes post-landing. We won't get that data for several hours after landing as it's being recorded and then will be forwarded to Earth later. We are continuing to receive heartbeat tones, indicating that everything is nominal. We're currently at about 3 minutes until entry interface.
okay. Very soon we'll be getting ones and zeros, I hope, from our radio on the rover. The entry interface is nothing more than just an arbitrary place in the sky that we've defined to be above the atmosphere. But from that point on, there's definitely atmosphere, and above it there isn't.
We are 2 minutes from entry interface. Perseverance is to transmit heartbeat tones, indicating everything is nominal.
So the tones can tell us whether something's bad or not is happening. So far the heartbeat is doing well. So the vehicle thinks it's in good shape to land, which is a great sign.
We're just under 2 minutes from entry interface. As it gets closer to Mars, Perseverance is actually being pulled in by gravity and accelerating. By the time Perseverance reaches entry interface point, she should be going just under 5.4 kilometers per second. We're at about 90 seconds from entry interface and standing by for Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to pick up the telemetry. We are 1 minute from entry interface.
MROs are in receive mode.
We have confirmation that the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is now relaying data from Perseverance. We're about 30 seconds from entry interface. Perseverance is going about 5.2 kilometers per second and is about 190 kilometers altitude above the surface of Mars. Confirm your eject data flow. About seconds from entry interface. 5.3 kilometers per second and an altitude of about 150 kilometers from the surface of Mars. We have confirmation of entry interface. Perseverance is currently going 5.3 kilometers per second at an altitude of about 120 kilometers from the surface of Mars. The ship is now waiting until it begins feeling the atmosphere of Mars slow it down. Once there's enough atmosphere, it will start controlling its path to the landing target. Navigation is also confirming that we can see a little bit of that slowdown of the atmosphere on the Perseverance entry capsule. Our current velocity is about 5.36 kilometers per second and an altitude of about 67 kilometers from the surface.
We are probably seeing MRO plasma blackout at this point.
I just want to remind everybody here, one of the interesting things about this particular landing is that we're landing in a really small landing ellipse that actually has some topography to it. And so this spacecraft actually has to take pictures of where it's going to land. And if it's a little too close to topography, it's going to readjust its position and move over to something flatter. That's something we've never done before anywhere. We've never done it on Mars. And so this is why everyone right now is holding their breath, because that's the part that's a little new to the engineering.
Deceleration, and has indicated that it felt approximately 10 Earth Gs of deceleration.
MRO has lock again.
We saw a small outage of the UHF telemetry from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter during that peak heating phase, likely caused by the plasma blackout. Perseverance is still continuing to perform bank reversals in the atmosphere to control its distance to the landing target. Perseverance is going about 1 kilometers per second at an altitude of about 16 kilometers from the surface of Mars. We have entered heading alignment, which means Perseverance is no longer trying to control the distance to Mars, but to the target on Mars, but instead is flying straight to the target. Our current velocity is about 550 meters per second at an altitude of about 15 kilometers from the surface.
MRO is reporting good telemetry log.
We are coming upon the straighten up. We are starting the straighten up and fly right maneuver, where the spacecraft will jettison the entry balance masses in preparation for parachute deploy and to roll over to give the radar a better look at the ground. The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed, and we are seeing significant deceleration in the velocity. Our current velocity is 430 meters per second at an altitude of about 12 kilometers from the surface of Mars. Perseverance is now slowed to subsonic speeds, and the heat shield has been separated. This allows both the radar and the cameras to get their first look at the surface. Current velocity is 145 meters per second and an altitude of about 9.5 kilometers above the surface.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Perseverance now has radar lock on the ground. Current velocity is about 100 meters per second, 6.6 kilometers of the surface. Perseverance is continuing to descend on the parachute. We are coming up on the initialization of terrain relative navigation and subsequently the priming of the landing engines. Our current velocity is about 90 meters per second at an altitude of 4.2 kilometers. We have confirmation that the lander vision system has produced a valid solution and part of terrain relative navigation. We have timing of the landing engine. Current velocity is 83 meters per second at about 2.6 kilometers from the surface of Mars. We have confirmation that the backshell has separated. We are currently performing the divert maneuver. Current velocity is about 75 meters per second at an altitude of about a kilometer off the surface of Mars.
Kieran, safety Bravo.
We have completed our terrain relative navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters off the surface of Mars. We have started our constant velocity accordion, which means we are conducting the sky crane, about to conduct the sky crane maneuver.
We've lost direct to Earth tones.
As expected. As expected.
Sky crane maneuver has started. About 20 meters off the surface.
We're getting signals from MRO.
UHF is good. Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the signs of past life. At this point, the surface stage has flown away to a safe distance. Perseverance is continuing to transmit direct through Mars orbiter to Earth.
Oh my God. Oh. Oh.
MRO reports they're still getting telemetry from the lander.
Oh.
All right, all stations.
Wow, we got it.
Touchdown confirmed. We're going to wait for the images.
Wow.
This is so exciting. The team is beside themselves. It's so surreal. Stay tuned. We might get some pictures.
So I think you all heard that. Touchdown is confirmed. The spacecraft has landed. It can actually tell us that if it crashed, so that means it didn't crash. So we're all very excited here. They're very excited there at JPL. We're gonna hang out here and hope they actually send us some pictures. I think usually the first pictures from Mars after a landing are very, very cool. We will bring up the audio to NASA TV again if something really cool happens, but I think, I don't know, I've lost track of everything because I was so excited, but I think we've actually gotten some questions in the chat window in the Q&A session, and so unless we see something really cool like pictures coming back from Mars, I think we'll give everyone an opportunity to sort of address those questions. Maybe some ones that we sort of missed during the previous hour and a half, I'm not sure. And if not, we can bring back up NASA TV, but do we have any questions out there from the audience? Oh, you can't see them. Morgan, do you have them? Professor Schaller, we can always bring up the podium mic, Morgan, if you need to come up, and I can step out of the way. right, where am I starting? Okay, so we'll go to me, and we have a question from Michael. Will the analyses include clay mineral presence and structure in correlation to what's on Earth for alternative support of abiotic origin hypotheses? And I think what I'll do is throw that to Steely. Steely, are you with us?
We have an image from Mars.
We have an image. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, that happened all kinds of fast, didn't it? Yeah.
Mars, and we will get higher resolution photos later in the day.
I think they're getting better already. My favorite, of course, is the shadow from the rover itself. They're always very cool. We do have an image. So Steely, can you get back to us? Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Can you get back to us on this question about analyses of clay minerals and structure and correlation to minerals on Earth? I think you're with us, Steely.
Yeah. Several of the instruments will be able to kind of make elemental and compositional measurements of clay minerals. The Raman will be able to look at hydration state, if those minerals are still hydrated or not. And the LIBS will be able to give us elemental analysis on that as well. And so the difference between this rover and the Curiosity rover is, for instance, the Curiosity rover contains what's called X-ray diffractometer, the Chemin instrument, and that can do X-ray diffraction, which will give more definitive mineralogy than the current payload can. But it'll be able to look at some of the peak compositions through Raman spectroscopy of common clay minerals. And certainly in the UV of Sherlock, we should be able to pick up, hydration states and positions and things like that. So we'll get a kind of general idea of the clay mineralogy that's there. Obviously, we're hoping for that these clay minerals are still hydrated and may indicate weathering patterns. For instance, certain minerals like talc or antigerite, serpentine-like minerals, will show some of liquid weathering in these areas, and that would be absolutely fantastic. And there has, some evidence to show that minerals will hold on to organic materials and hold those, kind of preserve them over time. And looking for clays, then we would also look for the organics using the Raman. The nice thing about Raman is you get both inorganic and organic mineralogy, and potentially organic signatures, or hopefully large signatures of some sort. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for with the clays.
Awesome, thank you, Steely. We have a bunch of questions here in the chat that are all related to the sample collection. Wide variety of questions. How many samples are they planning to take? How much sample can they take? And roughly, what's the timeline for bringing these samples back?
Well, about 35 samples, and also we have the capability to kind of do what's called a drillable blank, where we'll be able to kind of just basically look at the entire process from the drill point of view, so that we know what we're changing, what we're putting into those samples. But about 35 samples, between 300 and 400 grams, I think, that we'll get back, which is quite a lot. I did a lot of the work I do on Martian meteorites on 500 milligrams, so modern instrumentation is really very sensitive to that. And the timeline, I think, round about 2031 is hopefully when we'll receive them back. Like I say, my daughter in the background here will be the one probably analysing the samples and not myself.
Great. There's been a couple questions about sand and dealing with dust, and what kind of protection devices are on the rover, and maybe you're better suited to talk about at least the instrumentation and protection against dust storms and those sorts of things.
Yeah, most of they have a kind of stow position that keeps things safe, and the optics have covers to protect themselves under the harsh conditions. Curiosity, at the moment, we have an awful lot of dust. If you look at the images over time of Curiosity, you can see the buildup of dust on the surface. But for us, it's with Curiosity and Perseverance. For us, it's not so much of the problem as it was with the MER rovers, which were using solar power, because we're using RTGs, radioisotope thermal generators, not reliant on solar power, so that the power, it won't affect the power to the rover as it did with the MER rovers, which kept getting cleaned by dust devils, by the way. The reason they kept going so long is that it's because dust devils cleaned the rovers. So hopefully we'll get, you know, a bit of a Martian car wash from a few dust devils as well to keep the dust down. One of the interesting things is the calibration target that's on there. I don't know if anyone's a geocacher listening to this, but there's a geocache aboard Perseverance. There's also a calibration target for the RAM, the Sherlock instruments, etc. And that calibration target, part of its job is to show us what the dust accumulation is going to be like. And also one of the cal targets developed by Johnson Space Center, one of the cal targets is in fact spacesuit material. So they're going to look at how the dust affects that on Mars over time as well.
Fantastic, Steely. I actually have a question that's probably best for Karen. As far as you know, or other in the room, are any Rensselaer faculty or research teams part of the Perseverance science teams in terms of making operational decisions for the mission? And are there any Rensselaer teams performing investigations with return data?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, we don't have any faculty who are on the Rover science team. It's actually, I'll tell you a little bit about how this works. It's actually really hard to get on the Rover science team. Even Brian Henick, who's been a Mars geologist for something like 25 years, is not on the Rover science team. It's really hard to become a part of that team in terms of making decisions about what the rover does from one day to the next. It's this competitive process. We all put in proposals. No one here, at least in the Rare Center, put in a proposal, mostly because right now we're thinking a lot about the early Earth and prebiotic chemistry on the early Earth. The daily decision making on the rover is not so directly related to our research that we would actually sort of make that direct connection. Rather, what we do here is more likely going to benefit from the data that comes back, sort of no matter where the rover goes. So we are actually not part of that rover team, but I do know that Brian Henick, who I believe is still with us, actually has quite a few colleagues who are on this team, and maybe he can speak really quickly about how the selection for the rover team works and how many people are on it and how the day-to-day actually goes. Brian, are you still with us?
Yes, I am still with you.
Thanks.
So yay, congratulations. Made it. Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds of scientists literally on this rover team because every instrument has its own set of people. There are, people that are participating scientists, and everyone does a lot of jobs, just like we heard in the video earlier. The scientists, just like the engineers, do a lot of different jobs, and they change through time. So some will be on the short-term plan, like what are we doing the next day based on the data we got back today? And others are sort of on the long team plan of, okay, in 6 months, we want to be here. So what are the most interesting things along that path? And so, yeah, there are all these levels of time commitments and what the rover is going to do, short versus long versus mid. There's all the instrument teams that are, just trying to figure out if their instruments are turning on and working the way that they're supposed to, like Steely. So, yeah, there's a whole lot of roles involved with this from here on out.
Can I just ask you, Brian, that's a sort of a rolling team, right? So there are some folks on the team sort of now, and they sort of roll off and new ones roll on. Isn't that right, as the course of the next 687 days goes?
For this nominal mission, I think the team that's in place stays to be the team in place, but then there will be new calls to have new people added on, and I don't want to say this, but they want to get rid of the people that aren't really helping, participating like they're supposed to. So they kick some people off, or they have to repropose at least, and would like to add new blood throughout the mission. And even though it's a nominal 1 Mars year mission, just like Curiosity was 1.5 Mars years, I think, but it's gone 10 Earth years already. So we expect this will be a long-lived mission, has plenty of power to continue to drive itself and power the instruments for a decade. I would say would be probably a good estimate of how long this would survive on Mars based on the past over-engineered rovers. Once they get there, they do far better than what the engineers promise. They like to have their margins, but these things live for a long time, hopefully.
Yeah, Brian, we also, that's great. We have another question for you.
All right.
How do we determine whether a part on this crater is an inlet or an outlet from a previous time?
Yeah, good question. Well, we have good topographic maps of Mars, so good elevation data for Mars, so we can see which side is the uphill side, which side is the downhill side. And also just by looking at the way the river networks are coalescing, you can tell which way is the downhill direction. Yeah, good question.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I have a question that's probably geared more for Karen, I think. Actually, probably for everybody. Is there a protocol set up that if by chance, maybe not in this mission, because this mission is mainly focused on ancient life, but in a future mission, is there a protocol set up if we do find microbial life on Mars or on some other planetary body?
So I will start this answer really quickly, and then I will give Steely warning that I'm going to pass it over to him in just a second. NASA for decades now has had what we call a planetary protection officer. The planetary protection officer at NASA has 2 main jobs. One of them is to make sure that when we send spacecraft elsewhere, we send sterile spacecraft and we are not bringing terrestrial microbes or Earth microbes anywhere else in the solar system. And so that is one of the planetary protection officer's main jobs. The second job, though, of the planetary protection officer is really going to sort of come into sort of much higher sort of prominence in the next decade as we think about sample return, right? Because whether we can detect sort of extant or modern life on Mars, whether we detect it or not, during Mars sample return, we are very concerned that whatever comes back, if there's something there that we don't even recognize as life, we are very careful about bringing that back in a safe way, right? So we are going to return samples from Mars within hopefully the next decade. The planetary protection officer is a big part of trying to make sure that those samples come back and we don't essentially contaminate our own planet with Martian life. And so that plays a big part in the design and specificity of this Mars sample return handling facility. And so I imagine Steely has a little bit more information about the Mars sample handling return facility. And Steely, can you jump in and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, at the moment, the plans are well underway with international groups talking about where's going to host the samples. Obviously, in the US, JSC, Johnson Space Center in Houston, has the capability and the expertise to do so. It holds all of the astromaterials that have been collected over the years, Apollo, Stardust, OSIRIS-REx. Basically, they'll put together a center that will receive the samples from Mars initially. So part of the planetary protection chain here is a thing called break the chain to ensure that no Martian dust or materials can contaminate the Earth on the way back, just in case there are live organisms that we haven't been able to detect during the mission. At that point, it will go into the receiving facility and be aseptically handled. It's really interesting if you think about things like Ebola, these really nasty viruses that people work in laboratories on. That's called a biosafety level 4 laboratory. We actually have to be safer than that. We have to be at what is notionally biosafety level 5, because biosafety level 4 facilities are quite, they're not worried about contaminating the virus. And so we're quite concerned about making sure everything's clean for the sample so we can ensure that whatever sample we're looking at is absolutely pristine, that we're looking at the signal from Mars in that sample and not filling ourselves with bacteria that we've put there or compounds or chemicals that we've introduced to those samples that may mask an organism like that. And so all of the initial investigations will go through that first. And after that, if there is no life or if those samples are proven to the satisfaction of the scientists and working on that, and also the government entities concerned with that, then those samples will be released like the Apollo samples are now. The interesting fact about looking for Martian life is obviously you have to kind of be a bit smarter about whether or not the life you're looking for is like terrestrial life. So there's a lot of scientific hoops to jump through as far as recognizing a Martian life form over terrestrial life form. People like myself and people on the team have been thinking about that for a very long time, and how you do that and execute that to ensure that we keep Mars safe from Earth, us safe from Mars.
Great, thanks, Steely. We have a really nice question here for Karen and for all the panel. If I can find it, that would be helpful, huh? Since there's not really any degrees in astrobiology, can you explain the process of becoming an astrobiologist or getting involved with research on campus and in industry in this area?
I would be happy to start that and open that question up to anyone here. So first of all, actually, if you're an undergraduate here at RPI, you can get a minor in astrobiology. So please reach out to us. You can find us on the website. You can find me, well, you can't really find me here because we're really not on campus, but you can find me. We have an undergraduate program, at least a minor program in astrobiology. But one of the things I like to say about astrobiology is that it is a discipline that requires you to have both breadth and depth, right? You have to be an expert in something, right? It might be an expert in geology or an expert in astrophysics. It might be an expert in organic chemistry. And you need that to study things like the organic chemistry we might find on Mars. You might be an expert in analytical chemistry, like we saw from Mike Engel and our very own Jake Shelley, right? These are folks who have spent decades becoming the very best of their field and knowing sort of everything there is to know about that field. But you can't actually apply any of that expertise unless you can then take that expertise and understand the entire breadth of the astrobiology field, which includes everything from the origins of life on Earth to looking for exoplanets beyond our own solar system. It includes everything in between. And so astrobiology, to me, one of the reasons I sort of moved from I came up as an expert in geochemistry and extreme microbiology, and I still am. But I really moved into astrobiology because I love the breadth of understanding the chemistry of Mars and the climate of Mars and what's going on Titan and how we look for exoplanets, and trying to apply the geochemistry I know about the Earth to other planets, other moons, and other solar system bodies. And so being an astrobiologist is one of those things where you need to be a disciplinary specialist. So you're probably also a chemist or a geologist or biologist or physicist or something, right? You are a disciplinary specialist, and then you are also a multidisciplinary, or what I think we often term sort of a transdisciplinary specialist, right? You develop the abilities to take your disciplinary expertise and apply them sort of across this very, very broad discipline. And so there is a minor here at RPI in astrobiology. There aren't that many places, though, around the country that really have a program in astrobiology. And I think one of the reasons we have a minor and not a major is because we want our students in astrobiology to also major in a very specific discipline, so they can develop that disciplinary expertise. And so that's sort of what I think about astrobiology. You need to sort of be both of those things. I don't know if anybody on the rare faculty has anything to add, but if they do, I can step out of the way and you guys can jump in. It's all quiet on the Western Front here. Apparently, I did okay. So maybe we can go to another question from Jake.
Let's see. I'm trying to make it through these. Hold on.
Wait, can I add in one thing?
Absolutely, please.
So NASA has a lot of astrobiology summer schools or internships. So if you just search astrobiology.nasa.gov, you can get to education and internships. And a lot of these are collaborative with the European Space Agency and other partners. And there's summer schools in Spain, in Iceland, in Norway, in Hawaii, all over the place. So if you're an undergraduate wanting to get some experience under your belt, certainly those are some things you could seek out.
Yeah, that's a really, I totally forgot about that. Thank you for adding that. In fact, I once taught at one of these international astrobiology schools. I don't know why I forgot about it. That's where I met. In fact, we have a graduate student in the audience right here, Mary Herrera Perez, who I met at the astrobiology summer school, and she has now joined our program here in the Rare Center. So they are not only great opportunities to learn some really cool science, but maybe hopefully hook you up with people you want to go do your graduate degree with. So they do work pretty well, I think. Other questions, Jake?
We have a number of questions that have been popping up in terms of human habitability on Mars and monitoring those sorts of things. So what sort of work has been done in that area? And is there anything with the Mars 2020 mission involved in that, in trying to examine how easy it would be to have humans on Mars?
So I'm going to throw that question straight to Steely, who I hope is still with us. Maybe you can talk a little bit about MOXIE, and then a little bit more about humans staying on Mars for more than a minute.
Right. Yeah, this has been talked about for many years. There's been efforts over the years about, you know, if you put an astronaut down, how are you going to feed them? In fact, a lot of the stuff in the film The Martian was in collaboration with people from JSC at the long-term test facility there, where they kind of been locking people up for different durations. There is some analog site work where people are kind of gaming out what it would be like to live in a habitat on Mars for a long period of time. On this particular rover, there was a couple of key technologies that they're looking at. Obviously, a helicopter being one, you know, for reconnaissance and that, but also MOXIE, which is an instrument that's purely designed to do something that's called in situ resource utilization, ISRU. If we're going to send humans to Mars, you know, you're going to have to keep them resupplied, etc. There's a whole supply chain issue. How do you keep people alive and going? So one of the things you can do is to use instruments and machines to generate what you need from Martian raw materials. You know, the obvious one is water. You would think you would like to generate that if you possibly could. But this current experiment, MOXIE, it's an electrochemical separation technique, which is going to basically take CO2 and take the C off it, and leaving the O2, and then gather that O2. And so that obviously would be part of the breathing. You know, you want to kind of make sure that people can breathe. It's a good start. But also to, you know, you can use it as a propellant. So if you have to take, you know, if you imagine those huge rockets, they're like the Saturn V with 3 astronauts on top that had to break off and go to the moon through Earth's gravity. If you think about how much fuel is in that rocket to get it out of the gravity well of Earth, you do need a lot of fuel to get off the surface of Mars. Everything, if you had to take all of that with you, it really increases the mission complexity, cost, etc. So by making it there, using their materials, the astronauts could become self-sustaining. There's a big push now, not just from government agencies like NASA, but from private agencies, SpaceX, Blue Marble, I think, And those entities are really very, very serious about doing this and undertaking this. The dragon capture test recently being one example of that. So ultimately speaking, this rover is really going to help us as far as in situ resource utilization goes, and also with the terrain relative navigation that you just saw, how it navigated its way into a specific place, is fantastic for the payload that you would have to deliver time and time again to a certain habitat. You can imagine that if your landing ellipse is 100 kilometers, so you somehow get it there. I mean, it's like trying to land in Philadelphia and between, New York and Washington is your landing ellipse. It's going to be difficult. So that as well is a key demonstrator in this mission. The rest of the spacesuits are being developed. They're looking at that for working, obviously, Martian fines, like lunar fines can get into the gloves and the fabric and start to decay that. And that's where I come in onto the CalTag that has a little bit of spacecraft material in there. Shout out to Mark Fries for that, thinking of that. So you can see how Mars regolith and dust accumulates on the rover will affect that, those materials. So it's there are some crucial small steps with these missions, but the amount of landed payload in the Curiosity and Perseverance payloads is minuscule to the amount of payload that we're going to have to send with the first boots on the ground. And it's a huge endeavor and a huge undertaking. Hopefully around about the ends of 2035 to the end of the 2030s, that's when this will happen from a NASA point of view. I know that SpaceX is talking about maybe doing that a bit sooner. So there are all these efforts underway, and I think, in my time doing Mars research, sort of 20 years now, I have never seen things being developed at the pace or with the resolution to do so as I have at the moment. So I'm extremely optimistic that within my lifetime there'll be boots on the ground.
Great.
Thanks, Dealey.
Thanks, Dealey.
We have a question here from Emma. I'm a senior in high school, and next year I'll be a freshman and looking into going into the field of astrophysics or astrobiology. And I was wondering where a good starting point would be to pursue my interest in these fields, and particularly course-wise, but in other avenues as well.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start that, and then turn it over to my faculty colleagues and my panelists here. But honestly, I think the best thing to do, particularly as you start out your college career, is to really get deep into the math, the physics, the chemistry, and then the geology and the biology. Astrobiology is this, as I said, this very broad field. You're not going to follow every single one of those disciplines all the way. But what you are going to do is you're going to need that background in all of those. As you move forward in the rest of your career, you might be an astrophysicist, but this biology will come back to haunt you. It really, really will. And you'll need to sort of remember some of that biology. And so whatever you do, particularly while you're an undergrad, take advantage of all of these courses that get you the first year or two of each of these science disciplines. Astrobiology is a really, in some ways, a very intense discipline to follow because it requires all of these. And so go take your several years of chemistry and your several years of physics and take them all. It will certainly benefit you later, and it will make it much easier as you sort of go forward after that. And if you're out there, Emma, and you're thinking of sort of astrophysics and astrobiology, I hope you would consider RPI, since we actually have both of those. And what I want to do is sorry, don't watch the slides. It's going to be way too tough on you guys. But as we wrap up, we're getting close to the end here. What I want to do is remind everyone how to get in touch with us, right? So we are sort of here on campus when we can be on campus, but we are always around. So you can find information about the Astrobiology Center at rare.rpi.edu. We're all very excited to talk to you about the Earth First Origins project or all the other research that we do in the group. That's not the only piece of research, but we do quite a lot of research in the group. There's a lot of chemistry, there's data science, Of course, we have astrophysicists on campus, biologists, chemists, organic chemists involved. And we do actually have some ties with several of the engineering programs here on campus. And so there's a lot to do with astrobiology here on campus. Please come check us out. And also on rare.rpi.edu, we have some connections and some links to some really good NASA resources, including PCE3, as well as more of this coverage. So I think what I'll do at this point is I will sort of start wrapping this up. What I want to do first is thank all of the panelists who could join us today. This was a really big deal for us, and I want to thank.
Screen.
What's that?
Stop sharing your screen.
Stop sharing my screen. I'm getting yelled at. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. They take it away from me. They take all power away from me. They know me better than that. No, but I want to thank our panelists who did just such an incredible job to deliver this great program to you. I want to thank everyone from RARE who joined us. I know some of you are needing to leave, and I very much appreciate all of your time and effort. I'd also like to thank a really big shout out to Media Ops here at RPI. We would have been in the Stone Ages with square wheels and not been able to deliver any of this to any of you. And so really a huge thanks to the entire crew. You're all wonderful. And finally, I want to thank you all for coming. I had no idea when I started this, a little while ago. I was like, oh, we should have a watch party. I thought, maybe 3 people would show up in my basement, and like over 500 people showed up online. And, I would like to say I'm over the moon about this, but the moon is too close. We went to a whole other planet today. I'm like over Mars about this, really. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your participation. Please reach out to us on the website if you have any other questions or just want to touch base. And thank you for sharing the excitement of landing on Mars. We did it. So with that, I will thank you all for coming and wrap up the event. I'll wrap up the WebEx event, and we'll wrap up the recording and see you all next time. We should have a few more missions to cover. So thank you.